Okay. Assalamualaikum. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Waalaikumsalam.
Oh ya,
Siapa
gimana
ketua?
Nasir? Oh, are you online already? Okay, everybody, we have shared the virtual background in the chat room. Mana Sir Nasir? We will start at 8:45 ya, sharp.
Ya, ketua.
Oh ya. Ya, Sir Nasir. I think we will start in 3 minutes. Good morning, Jeff.
Good morning, Ariadna. It's nice to see you
Yeah.
again.
Morning. You are already online.
Yes.
How are you, Jeff? Long time no see.
Yes, it's been a very long time. I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Okay, Jeff, we will start the webinar in 3 minutes.
Okay.
So there will be a welcoming speech from the Dean, and later on, the moderator will introduce you.
Okay. Thank you.
And then we are expecting to start at 9 a.m. sharp.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yeah, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair. Abang Danasir. Bang Nasir. Okay, we are still waiting for our chair. So, Jeff, what time is it again in Adelaide?
It is now 11:15.
11:15.
Yes. A bit of a time difference.
Yeah. So how's the weather in Adelaide, Jeff?
It's very nice today. We've got a nice sunny
Is it
day.
summer?
No, it's autumn.
It's autumn now.
Autumn now, yes. Yeah. So it's starting to get cooler.
Yeah. In Medan, there are only 2 seasons, Jeff. Yeah?
Both of them hot.
Yeah, rainy seasons and dry season, and that's all we have.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm wondering if you know, we have another season actually. It's called durian season. Have you heard of it?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, durian. Yeah, durian is a typical fruit. I don't know if you have heard of it, right?
No.
To many Westerners, it smells rotten, a bit rotten. Yeah,
Okay.
it's spiky on the outside,
Mhm.
but yeah, we love it very much. So yeah, we call it durian season. Yeah.
Oh, right.
This season is named after the fruit, actually.
Oh. No, I don't like durian, unfortunately.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Chair. I think.
Yes, thank you. Sorry.
Oh yeah, I think we can start now, Mr. Chair. Yeah.
Sorry, because you told me just now start at 8:45. So
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I already in here at 8 o'clock. I already.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Okay, the floor is yours. Yeah.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning,
Waalaikumsalam.
ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to each and every one of you for being here today on Friday Forum. Welcome. It's such an honor for me to speak on behalf of the Friday Forum. Let me begin to warm welcome for all the participants. Welcome to all of you, to the Dean, Dr. Abdurrahman M. Hum, to the First Dean, Dr. Wahyu Triatmojo M. Hum, Second Dean, Dr. Masito Warni MED, and the Third Dean, Dr. Maricha M. Hum. Before we start, I would like to express my appreciation to the faculty, department, and program study who generously help us to make this FGD. And today in FGD, we would like to learn, especially from Dr. Jeffrey Gill from Flinders University of Australia, with the topic of the evolving geopolitics of English as a global language, future scenario and implication for TESOL practitioners. And also thank you for the moderator, Cecilia Fitriani Damanik, SSM2, for being here today, I think. Ibu. Last but not least, I would like to give this forum to our head department, Ariadna, MA, PhD, to take some warm welcome to our speaker, and will be continued to our dean later on, I think, right? Mr. Ariadna.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning again, everybody. I hope you are all doing great. Allow me in this occasion to say a few words on behalf of the English Language and Literature Department. Firstly, I would like to express our gratitude to our speaker today, Dr. Jeffrey Gill from Flinders University, Adelaide, Australia. It's an honor to be able to invite and welcome you to our Friday Forum webinar. Secondly, I would like to acknowledge the hard work that the committee has invested in making this event possible. Finally, I hope all the participants can benefit from this webinar. I think that's all from me. Thank you very much. I will hand over to Mr. Chair now.
Okay, thank you, our head department, English department in Universitas Negeri Medan. Now, I would like to invite our dean to give a warm welcome to open this forum for the dean. Time is for the dean. Saya rasa is that the dean will open it.
I think represented.
Oh, okay.
By...
Okay, I think represented to the second dean or the first dean?
First dean.
The first dean. Okay, thank you untuk Bapak Dr. Wahyu Triatmojo. Waktu dan tempat kami persilakan.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Muhammad Nasir. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Syukur alhamdulillah pada Allah Tuhan Yang Maha Kuasa atas rahmat dan karunia-Nya kita bisa bertemu secara langsung melalui Zoom meeting ini. Pertama, mohon maaf Dekan EPS Bapak Dr. Abdurrahman Adi Satrehum belum bisa bergabung bersama kita karena memang ada kegiatan yang harus beliau selesaikan. Salam dari beliau untuk kita semua. Hello, good morning everyone. First of all, let us express our gratitude to Allah, God the Almighty, who has given us blessing and mercies so we can come and participate in today's Friday Forum webinar. I am Wahyu Triatmojo, first Vice Dean of Faculty Language and Arts, State University of Medan. I have been asked by the committee to officially open this event. Friday Forum webinar is a regular academic activity conducted by the English Language and Literature Department to share and disseminate information on current research and trend in language learning and teaching. Previous invited speakers come from both Indonesia and other countries. In this occasion, I would like to welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Jeffrey Gill from Flinders University, Australia, who has volunteered his time to give a talk in this webinar. Thank you for your willingness, Dr. Jeffrey Gill, and I hope we can invite you in person to our faculty in the future. To all the participants, we hope that through this webinar, you can experience new things and improve your knowledge at the same time. Last but not least, my appreciation also goes to the organizing committee who have made this event possible. Without further ado, I hereby declare the Friday Forum webinar officially open. Thank you, and I have a nice day. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, the First Dean of Universitas Negeri Medan, Bapak Wahyu. Well, I don't want to take much of your time. I have to give this directly to the moderator. Introduce to our speaker, to all of you. Okay, to Ibu Silsila, please. Thank you for being here in Friday Forum.
Well, thank you, Bapak Dr. Muhammad Nasir M.Hum. Yeah, well, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi, good morning. Peace be upon us all. Thanks for allowing me to be a moderator for this Friday's Forum webinar entitled The Evolving Geopolitics of English as a Global Language, Futures, Scenarios, Implications for TESOL Practitioners. Well, how are you today? I hope all of you are fine, Alhamdulillah. Well, let us be grateful that in the middle of our activities, we are still given health and the opportunity to meet virtually today. Before we begin, let us give a big round of applause to all of us present this morning. Yeah. Well, ladies and gentlemen, on today's Friday Forum, we have a great guest speaker from Australia. Jeffrey Gill is a senior lecturer in TESOL at Flinders University, Adelaide, Australia, where he is involved in the development, teaching, and administrations of TESOL courses at the undergraduate and postgraduate levels. He has also taught English as a foreign language and applied linguistic courses at universities in China. His main research interests are English as a global language, English language education policy and planning in Asian context, and the use of status of Chinese in the world. He has published widely on these topics. He is also the author of 2 books. The first one is Soft Power and the Worldwide Promotion of Chinese Language Learning, the Confucius Institute Project. And the second is The Rise of Chinese as Global Language, Prospect and Obstacle. And he also as a co-editor of Exploring Language in Global Context. Well, I'm really sorry, Mr. Gill. I think I cannot read all of your full profile here, but you, ladies and gentlemen, can view the full profile of Dr. Jeffrey Gill from the link attached in the chat box later. Yeah, in this Friday Forum, Mr. Gill will focus on the implication of China's rise for English as a global language and the associated prevalence of TESOL. For your information, ladies and gentlemen, he has already proposed and evaluated 3 possible future scenarios. Yeah, so ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure that all of us are curious to know more about the scenarios. Without further ado, please welcome the honorable guest speaker, Dr. Jeffrey Gell. Time is yours, Mr. Jeffrey.
Okay, thank you very much for your very kind introduction. It's my pleasure to join you here today for your webinar. I'd like to thank the organisers for the invitation. It's very nice to see some familiar faces in the audience and meet some new friends.
Okay.
So please bear with me a moment while I share my screen to upload my PowerPoint slides. Okay. Okay, so are you all able to see my slides?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Without further ado, I'll get underway. So hello, everyone. My name's Jeff Gill. I'm a senior lecturer in TESOL at Flinders University in Adelaide. And in my presentation today, I'm going to discuss the broader geopolitical context of English as a global language and how this might change due to China's rise. I'll start by talking about how English became a global language, then discuss some predictions about the future of English as a global language with a particular focus on China's rise. I'll then present 3 scenarios for the future of English as a global language based on the possible outcomes of China's rise. Finally, I'll conclude the presentation by discussing some implications of the future of English as a global language for us as TESOL practitioners. So let's begin with some background. David Crystal defined global language as a language that has a special role that is recognised in every country. There are 3 components to this special role: native language, official language, and foreign language. The native language component means that a global language must be the first language of the majority of people in some countries. The official language component means that a global language must be widely adopted as an official or a co-official language used for things like government administration and other important societal functions in countries around the world. The foreign language component means that a global language must be the priority language taught in second and foreign language education in many countries around the world. A language can obtain this position because of the power and influence of the people who speak it and the power and influence of the countries in which it is spoken. In the case of English, it was the language of the 2 most powerful and important countries of modern times. Firstly, Britain, which held this role from the 17th century through to the 19th century, and then the USA, which held this role from the 20th century through to the present day. In a nutshell, there were 3 factors which contributed to English becoming a global language. The first of these was British colonialism, which spread English very widely around the world and established it as an official language, a first language, or a medium of instruction. The second was the Industrial Revolution, which made English necessary for understanding and accessing new developments in science and technology. The third was the USA's role in the world, particularly after the Second World War, which made English the language of important political and economic international organisations, continued the necessity of English for accessing developments in science and technology, and made English the main language of the world's popular culture. So these 3 factors together have given us a situation in which English is in a unique position amongst the world's languages. It is the dominant language of many fields, such as science, technology, international business, and diplomacy, and is also the main language of books, newspapers, and academic conferences. English currently has official or special status in more than 70 countries around the world, spread across Africa, Asia, and the Pacific, and is the priority second or foreign language in the education systems of more than 100 countries around the world. Perhaps not surprisingly, given this situation, scholars and researchers have for a long time now predicted that English has a long future as a global language, and we can observe this trend over several decades. For example, in the 1980s, Wardo predicted that only a political or a natural catastrophe would dislodge English as a global language. A decade later, in the late 1990s, Honey argued that only an event on the scale of aliens invading the Earth would mean that English would lose its status as a global language. Not long after, Bruthel similarly argued that only a world-shaking event would cause another language to replace English as a global language. Most recently, Mackenzie has argued that English has a long future as a global language. What we can see in common across all these quotes and predictions is that scholars have argued that only a truly momentous event would create a situation in which another language replaced English as a global language. However, when we look around the world today, we can observe some events and some trends which could justifiably be described as momentous. These include the economic growth of non-English speaking countries and regions, Brexit, the Trump presidency and its impact on America domestically and internationally, and most recently, the COVID-19 pandemic. The event I'm going to focus on, however, is China's rise. China is becoming more powerful and influential across a number of areas, and this is likely to have a profound effect on the world. So if we accept the idea that languages become important and grow in their use and status because of the power and influence of their speakers and the countries in which they are spoken, we could ask ourselves, will there come a time when Chinese replaces English as a global language? Before we explore this question in detail, though, let's take a moment to define what we mean by Chinese. So we can think of Chinese as being a macro language. In other words, it is a single language with several different varieties. The main varieties of Chinese are Mandarin, Wu, Xiang, Yue, otherwise known as Cantonese, Kejia, Gan, and Min. Of these, Mandarin is the dominant variety of Chinese. It is spoken by approximately 70% of the population of China and is also the basis for the national standard language, or modern standard Chinese, used for important societal functions, such as government administration, education, etc., across the PRC, Taiwan, and Singapore. Mandarin is also increasingly used in the Chinese diaspora. So because of this, Mandarin is the variety of Chinese that is relevant to our discussion today of the future of English as a global language. So when I refer to Chinese during this presentation, I'm really referring to Mandarin. However, I do acknowledge that some of the complexity of the Chinese language will be lost by doing so. So let's return to our main question of the impact of China's rise on the future of English as a global language. I propose three possible scenarios for the future of English as a global language. The first of these is continuation, in which English remains a global language. The second is coexistence, in which both English and Chinese are global languages. And the third is replacement, in which Chinese becomes a global language instead of English. Which of these three scenarios eventuates will depend on the outcome of China's rise. The outcome of China's rise itself is by no means certain. So, what are the possible outcomes of China's rise? If we look in the literature that has been written about China and its future, we can identify four main strands. The first of these is China as a superpower. This is the idea that China will become the world's most powerful country, akin to the USA today. The second is China as a major power. This is the idea that China will become one of a number of important and powerful countries, but will not dominate the world outright. It will also be constrained from becoming a superpower by the problems it faces. The third is China as a threat. This is the idea that China's rise presents a challenge or a danger to the current international system and will result in confrontation with other countries. The fourth is China's decline. This is the idea that the many problems that China faces will eventually overcome it, and its development and economic growth will stagnate and go backwards. So we can map these possible outcomes of China's rise onto the three scenarios for the future of English as a global language, as you can see on this slide. So I will argue that continuation could result from China's decline or China as a threat. Coexistence could result from China becoming a major power, and replacement could result from China becoming either a superpower or China as a threat. So let's have a look in more detail at each of these, starting with continuation. So continuation could come about due to two outcomes of China's rise: decline or threat. In the case of decline, we can observe that the current interest in Chinese language learning around the world is primarily driven by China's geopolitical importance in the world and China's economic importance in the world. So if China's economic development and growth was to stagnate or to go backwards, then Chinese would lose much of its appeal. And we can identify similar cases of other languages losing their appeal due to economic or political problems experienced by their countries. For example, the number of students learning Japanese in Australia declined following Japan's decade or so of economic troubles. Similarly, the number of students studying Indonesian in Australia also declined following the Asian financial crisis of the late 1990s and the terrorist attacks in Indonesia in the early 2000s. Of course, these were not the only factors that explain the decline in Japanese and Indonesian language learning. However, they were nevertheless contributing factors. So we can draw a parallel to Chinese and say that if China was to experience serious economic problems, then it would likely result in a situation where Chinese lost its appeal and English continued to be a global language. Continuation could alternatively result from China being a real or perceived threat. If China is perceived as a threat by other countries or presents a real threat to other countries, it's likely to result in resistance to learning Chinese and resistance to the idea of Chinese as a global language. And we can see some evidence of this occurring already in the growing tensions between China and other countries, which have in some cases led to resistance to learning Chinese. For example, Australia's relations with China have deteriorated in recent years, and this has led some media commentators and people involved in the education field to view Chinese language learning as being suspicious or as having a political motivation. This is especially the case when Chinese language teaching and learning is conducted through Chinese government-sponsored initiatives like the Confucius Institutes and Confucius Classrooms. Similarly, in New Zealand, there were recently concerns over government-sponsored Mandarin language assistance supplied by the Chinese government to New Zealand as part of a trade deal, and the implications that this would have on schools and students. So in a situation where China is a perceived or a real threat, the learning of Chinese may still continue for security reasons, but to be a global language, a language needs to have appeal for a much wider set of reasons, as we see with English. It is appealing for everything from politics to economics, to science and technology, to popular culture. Now let's look at the coexistence scenario. I see this arising from China becoming a major power. In a world where there are a number of powerful and important countries, but no one single country dominates the world outright, English will not be the only language that is seen as important. And it is likely that other languages will also be seen as important and increase their use and status. And we can see some evidence of this happening with Chinese already in two areas. First of all, perceptions towards Chinese, and secondly, the increasing use of Chinese in physical and virtual space. So in terms of perceptions, in some parts of the world, it appears that Chinese is being increasingly perceived as a beneficial or advantageous language to learn. For example, many students in African countries are learning Chinese because of the job opportunities resulting from China's investment in Africa and the ease of obtaining student visas to China compared to Western countries, and much cheaper tuition fees in China. There are also a number of Chinese English bilingual schools which have opened in English-speaking countries such as the USA, UK, and Australia. Secondly, Chinese appears to be being used more in countries outside of China and other Chinese-speaking countries and regions on things like signs and billboards and mobile apps. And in a few moments, I'll show you some examples of what I mean. But together, these perceptions of Chinese and use of Chinese are creating what I call a parallel space in which Chinese is not displacing English, but is increasingly being used alongside English and developing greater recognition and status. So here are some examples of the increasing uses of Chinese that I was referring to just a moment ago. So these are signs that appear in and around Adelaide's central business district. The first is a sign from Adelaide Airport, and you can see that there are Chinese characters alongside the English on the signage. And this is happening increasingly in many airports around the world. And I'd be quite interested to know if this is the case in airports in Indonesia. The second one is a sign from a pharmacy in Rundle Mall, which is the main shopping street in Adelaide. And the sign reads, "Welcome, we speak Chinese." So this is an attempt by this pharmacy to attract the attention of Chinese speakers and to get them to come to the shop and make purchases. The third is a sign displayed in a restaurant, and it refers to a mobile phone app called YouWai, or in English, UI. And you can see there a QR code. And how this works is that Chinese speakers can scan the QR code with their phone or other device and access information in Chinese about the establishment. And this is widely displayed on shops, restaurants, and other kinds of businesses around Adelaide, so that Chinese speakers are able to access information about what kind of shop or business it is and the kinds of products that it sells. So this is what I mean by the increasing use of Chinese in physical and virtual space. So if we turn our attention now to the third scenario, which is replacement. I see this as arising from either China as a superpower or China as a threat. So if China was to become a superpower, it would be in a position to use its power and influence to shape a new international system, much like the USA did after the Second World War, by putting in place policies and initiatives such as the Marshall Plan for helping countries to redevelop, and founding important international political and economic organizations such as the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, etc. And we can observe China taking some steps in this direction as well. I'm sure you've heard of the Belt and Road Initiative, which is a major infrastructure project to connect China to other countries through road, rail, and maritime transportation networks. China was also a founding member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which brings together China, Russia, and the Central Asian republics to deal with regional, economic, political, and other issues. China was also one of the important founding members of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which funds various infrastructure and development projects in Asia. Looking at government statements and speeches, in recent years, China has also attempted to position itself as a leader on free trade and globalization, in climate change and space exploration, when arguably Western countries have not focused as much on these areas. So if all of these policies and initiatives on China's part were to be successful, then Chinese would be the language associated with new ideas and new developments, much like we observed with English due to the USA's role in the world. If China were to become a superpower, it's also likely that it would want to see Chinese used more often as a matter of national pride. In another set of circumstances, replacement may come about due to China being a threat. If China was to successfully challenge the current international system and win any confrontation between other countries, then it would similarly be in a position to create a new international system under its leadership. As with the superpower outcome, Chinese would be the language of this system and would be necessary for interacting with it and accessing developments and new developments. However, in this situation, it's likely that there would be some resistance to Chinese, and we can observe a similar trend in the former Soviet Union. As I'm sure you're aware, in the former Soviet Union, Russian was a compulsory language in the education systems of the countries within the Soviet Union, as well as the satellite countries. And it was often used as a main language of society for government administration, etc. And there was quite a lot of resistance to Russian, most famously in the case of Hungary, where it is said that not learning Russian was a national sport. So people deliberately did not learn Russian as a way of showing resistance to Soviet rule. When the Soviet Union collapsed, many governments and education systems took steps to remove Russian and to replace it in public space. So for example, in the newly independent Central Asian republics, many of them replaced Russian in their education systems with English, and in some cases took steps to remove Russian from public space, such as on street signs, etc. So they are the scenarios for the future of English as a global language and how they may come about due to the various outcomes of China's rise. It's difficult to put a timeline on when these scenarios may come about. However, as a rough guide, I would suggest that for the next 50 years, we would see continuation. And I say this because China is not yet the world's superpower, and there are growing tensions between China and some other countries which create resistance to learning Chinese. In the next 50 to 100 years, I think it's likely we will see increasing coexistence due to the increasing use of Chinese, according to the examples I showed earlier. In the very long term, it is possible that Chinese would replace English as a global language. However, this would require China to become the world's superpower or predominant power, and it would also require Chinese to have a much stronger association with popular culture, science and technology, and education. As I mentioned earlier, the main appeal of learning Chinese now for a second language or foreign language learners is based on geopolitical and economic reasons, whereas we can observe with the case of English, it is not just these reasons, but the association of English with popular culture, science and technology, and accessing knowledge in virtually all fields. So this is a part of the profile of Chinese that is lacking at the moment and would need to improve should Chinese become a global language. So in the final part of this presentation, I'd like to reflect on some of the possible implications of these scenarios for us as TESOL practitioners. So one particularly obvious development that's going on at the moment is that we can see the development of teaching Chinese to speakers of other languages alongside TESOL. Now, of course, the teaching of Chinese as a second or foreign language does have a long history, but is only in relatively recent times when it has been explicitly termed teaching Chinese to speakers of other languages on the same parallel acronym as TESOL. And there are now degree programs in teaching Chinese to speakers of other languages at Chinese universities, and dedicated academic journals in both China and the West. So one particularly interesting example is the journal Global Chinese, published by De Gruyter, which specifically focuses on the use and status and learning of Chinese in a global context. So if we think about what this development of teaching Chinese to speakers of other languages may mean, I think there is an opportunity for us to share expertise and collaborate with colleagues in Chinese language education. As Chinese language learning becomes more popular, and should the language continue to increase its use and status around the world, it's likely that researchers and practitioners in Chinese will encounter many of the same issues that we have had to deal with as TESOL practitioners. So to mention just a few examples, that there may be questions of which variety of the language students should learn and teachers should teach, the role of native and non-native speakers as teachers, and issues around culture, identity, and ownership of the language, and whether popular teaching methods such as communicative language teaching or task-based language teaching can be used across all contexts. So these are all issues that have a large body of research and a large body of knowledge in TESOL. So I think there is an opportunity for us to compare our experiences and our findings with colleagues in Chinese language education. So I would encourage you to reach out to colleagues in Chinese language education at your university or other universities. They're looking more broadly and a little bit more long-term. I think should we arrive at a point where Chinese is a global language instead of English, then there would be a need to adjust to a reduced dominance of English. So as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, one of the characteristics of a global language is that it's the priority foreign or second language in language education around the world. So this is largely driven by English being the global language. So if it was no longer the global language, there would likely be less demand and less compulsion to learn English. And there would be, therefore, fewer teaching opportunities as well, particularly for or underqualified teachers. It's somewhat unfortunate today that someone can find a teaching job without necessarily having qualifications or training in TESOL. So I think that there would be obviously less demand for English teaching and learning in a world where English was no longer the global language. So what could we do to maintain student interest in English in this situation? I think it would be necessary to rethink the rationales for teaching and learning English. So at present, much of the rationale for teaching and learning English is based on instrumental reasons. For example, English can get you a job, English can get you a promotion or higher pay, etc. Whereas there may need to be a shift in thinking to emphasizing more on the intrinsic reasons for learning English, such as for accessing the cultures of English-speaking countries, for example. So that concludes my presentation. Here are the references that I've used. If you'd like further information about any of the points that I've made, you're welcome to follow those up. And if you'd like to find out more about Flinders University, you can follow these links here. So thank you very much for listening, and thank you once again for the invitation to be part of your webinar.
Well, thank you, Mr. Jeffrey. It's really interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, dear participant, let me remind you all that if you have any questions, you can drop it in a chat box, or maybe you can directly raise your hand. And don't forget, we also want to know your name and also your institution. Yeah, it's time for you, dear participant, to have a question related to what Mr. Jeffrey has already presented.
Hello.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we have already got
Good
one.
morning.
Good morning, Bapak Lidiman.
Yes, good morning. How are you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm really good today, Pak Lidiman. You have any question, I think, Pak Lidiman?
Yes, sure, of course.
Okay, yeah.
To Jeffrey,
Hmm.
I think your presentation is really wonderful. It's quite provocative, but I believe that Chinese won't be that dominant considering the characters of the language. You know, there are more than 5,000 characters, so it's really difficult to learn this language. Only when the Chinese language is Latinized, probably it can replace English, because we know the advancement of technology and science in China is parallel, almost equal to the United States.
Mhm.
And this also proves the biblical prophecies that there will be three beasts in the world: Russia, United States, and Chinese or China. So my question is there any real threat to the Australian people, particularly when we see the case of the Taiwan? When China wants to invade Taiwan, Australia joins the USA to defend Taiwan. Is there a real threat by the Chinese people? That's number one. And number two, what do you think about the Chinese immigrants in the United States? Do they have that kind of homeland feeling or a sort of awareness that they should also defend China, even though they are now US citizens? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. It's a very interesting question to think about. So as for the situation with Taiwan and the potential for Australia to become involved, Australia is a staunch US ally, so I think it's likely that in the unfortunate case of a war between China and the US, Australia probably would support the US. However, I certainly hope that situation doesn't eventuate. And so the position of the Australian government is that it wants to avoid any kind of war with China, and wants to work to make sure that there's peace in the region. As for the Chinese immigrants in the US and elsewhere, I think it's a very diverse group with all sorts of views and varying degrees of loyalty or affiliation to the Chinese government. So as I said, I think some would probably feel some kind of loyalty to China and the government, whereas others would feel a loyalty to their new home. It's a very diverse group.
I mean, how real is the threat? Because, you know, Australian government has just bought several modern submarines from the States because they have the fear that China will invade Australia also. What do you think about that?
Well, I think the perception of a threat from China has grown much stronger. As to how real that threat is, that's a little bit beyond my expertise. But I
understand. Yeah, okay.
I certainly
that's
hope
fine.
we don't understand.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine.
Situation.
Okay.
But yes,
Yes,
thank you.
yes, sure. Thank you. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Pak Lidiman.
Yeah,
And
sure.
Mr. Jeffrey, I think we have already got three participants who on a chat box. Yeah, the first one is Barley Kifli. Try to ask you, do you agree that the entertainment industry plays a role in making English as popular as it is today? Yeah, that's the first one. And the second, do you think China's rise will also change the language used in entertainment today? Yeah, I give it to you, Mr.
Okay,
Jeffrey.
thank you. These are two very interesting questions. Firstly, I think the association of English with popular culture has a very important influence on English being a global language. We can observe that most of the most popular movies, TV programs, video games, etc., predominantly come from the USA and other English-speaking countries. So this is a very strong motivation for students, particularly younger people, to learn English, because they want to go and watch the latest Hollywood movie or play video games in English. So as I mentioned in the presentation, I think that is a current gap or a shortcoming with Chinese, which is not strongly associated with entertainment and popular culture. There are very few worldwide popular Chinese products. I think there are products from Japan like anime and manga, and from Korea like K-pop music. Are much more popular than any popular culture coming from China. But if China was to become the world's most powerful country, then there would probably be more interest in China's popular culture.
Okay, well, and then the next question is from Nazla Shahab. Oh, for your information, Mr. Jeffrey, the previous participant who asked you is from our department. Pak Lidiman also from our department. Yeah, English department. Yeah, and then the next question comes from Nazla Shahab. She asks you, as the growth of their entertainment industry and also their business have dominated the world, a lot of people start to learn Korean language. So what is your opinion about this phenomenon? Yeah, that's the question from Nazla. Okay,
yes,
Jeffrey.
Yes, I touched on this before. I think the Korean popular music, TV dramas and movies,
K-pop, right?
Yes, exactly, are having a big influence. I have many of my students, for example, are very interested in K-pop, and some are learning Korean for that reason. So I think it will increase the number of people learning Korean, but it may be for very narrow reasons of accessing popular culture. I think to be a global language, a language needs to be associated with a very wide range of areas. So politics, economics, science and technology, popular culture, etc. And so Korean certainly has that cultural appeal, but whether it has appeal in those other areas, it certainly doesn't have as much appeal in those other areas. So I can't see Korean being a strong contender for being a global language.
Okay, well, the next question from Indra Hartoyo is also from our department. Yeah, and he asked, China began the foreign direct investment policy in 1980s. Mr. Hartoyo believes with the policy, China massively required their people to learn English. But then when the country has become one of the superpower countries, they want Chinese language to be used worldwide and most probably considered as the most prominent language in all sectors. Yeah, and the question is, do you think it was actually part of China's strategy to steal the market of language learning from English? That's the question, Mr. Jeffrey.
That's a very interesting question. I don't think there was a deliberate strategy or plan to steal the market, but I think language learning naturally follows geopolitical trends. So when English is the most powerful, important countries in the world are English-speaking countries, then other countries want to learn English to access the benefits that it provides. So when there's a change in geopolitical circumstances, then people start to want to learn the language of the emerging power. But I think China would certainly like to see Chinese use more. And as I said in the presentation, if it did become the superpower, I think it would be a matter of national pride to expect that other countries would learn Chinese and use Chinese in their dealings with China.
What do you think, Pak Hartoyo? Maybe do you have any other questions related to what Mr.
Well,
Jeffrey has already stated? Maybe.
Actually,
Ah,
the question, yeah, but I do not know. Sometimes in the world of politics, yeah, there are always ways, to well, I don't know, to dominate people, right? Again, sometimes this just happens unconsciously, and well, that we do not know what is behind it, but as we know now, and we can see that China, have become a very strong country. Yeah, and in many aspects, okay, including probably language learning later. Okay, yeah. Well, so I think it can be a part of a strategy of a country, yeah, when they really want the language to be let's say
used.
acknowledged by the world's community. Probably, let's say, think of the formula. Okay. Yeah, sometimes it might be a bit harsh to some people, but I think it is not. Okay, because all countries in the world must have strategies to win, all competitions. That's it.
Yes, no, I think that's a good point, and we can see China has certainly put a lot of resources and effort into promoting the learning and teaching of Chinese, most notably through the Confucius Institutes and Confucius classrooms. And there is certainly a view among the Chinese government and Chinese scholars that by promoting the language, having people learn Chinese, they can become more familiar with China, more knowledgeable and understanding of China's culture, history, and politics, and therefore hopefully more sympathetic towards China. And of course, as you say, other countries do this. So France has the Alliance Française, Germany has the Goethe Institute, etc. So this idea of promoting one's language to make people more familiar or more friendly towards you is definitely something that China and many other countries are doing and have done.
Well, I agree. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jill.
Okay, thank you, Pak Hartoyo. And we have Nisa here. Yeah. The question is, do you agree that I think Nisa's question has already answered by Mr. Jeffrey, right? Do you think China's rise will also change the language used in the entertainment industry? Yeah. I think that was the previous questions asked by Barley. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we still have time. Yeah, Mr. Jeffrey still have time for us to discuss about. Seems that Pak Lidiman has another question for Jeffrey.
Okay, Jeffrey, I'm coming back. Talking about universities in Australia, you got benefit from Chinese students. I think even from Indonesia, there are 8,000 students studying in Australia, and mostly they are rich people. Chinese are known as rich people in Indonesia. Is there any kind of agenda on the part of the government that wants to please these Chinese students coming from around the world, that you should also promote Chinese language in your country? So it's a kind of a language policy on your government side. Thank you.
No, I don't think the two are related. I mean, so there's certainly been a lot of emphasis in Australian language policy on Chinese since the late 80s, early 90s, to have Australians learn Chinese, because Chinese is perceived as being useful for economic interactions with China. But I think attracting Chinese international students is not really related to that. That's really something universities want to do to get the international student fees and to increase their academic interactions with China. So I don't think there's any, in the government's mind, any relationship between promoting Chinese and attracting Chinese international students.
Okay, clear.
Yeah. Yeah, it's clear, Pak Ridwan, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Well, we still have another question from Rentauli Silalahi, Jeff. Thank you for the great presentation, Jeff. And while Chinese has been expanding its soft power through the promotion of Chinese language, she believes it won't be that easy and soon enough to be a global language. And she thinks English will remain dominant for many years to come for many reasons, as you mentioned, and particularly international students are interested to study overseas when the university offers courses in English. Yeah, more international collaboration are established between institutions, organizations, and so on and so forth. When English is used as medium of communication. However, the question, your opinion for what should be done to at least avoid the threat of English as linguistic imperialism? That's the question, Jeff.
It's a very big question. I'll do my best
Right.
to answer it. But yes, so I agree that it will be a long time before English stops being a global language. It won't happen, tomorrow or even in the next decade or two, if it does happen. As for trying to avoid English linguistic imperialism, I think there's a number of things we can do. I think we can acknowledge the many different varieties of English that are used around the world and the many different ways that it is used. So we can observe literature, movies, other songs, etc. that produced in English by non-native speakers that express their own culture and own identity. And I think we can try to incorporate these things into our teaching to show students that English is not just, say, Australian or American or British culture, but can be used to express any cultures or identities. And we can probably need to think more about the policies around English, such as requirements for English for progressing through the education system, or requirements for English for certain kinds of jobs. I think in some cases there are possibly unfair requirements or demands for people to have English to get a job when that job is not necessarily involved in using English. So I think evaluate and critique various educational and employment policies to identify problems and encourage our educational authorities and governments to change those.
Okay, I hope it's already clear for Rentauli. Yeah, we still have many questions here, Mr. Jeffrey. The next will be from Chatur Prasetyo, and he asks you, does the level of difficulty of a certain language, China in this case, can be the obstacles to be a global language? That's the question.
Yes, well, this is a very interesting issue, and could be another presentation in itself. But yes, I think Chinese is certainly very widely perceived to be a difficult language, primarily because of the character-based written system, and to a lesser extent, it's a tonal language, so the pitch changes meaning. However, I don't see the written script as being as big an obstacle as some other researchers. I think, first of all, because to be a global language, it would not be necessary for everyone to be able to read and write Chinese. Just like with English, not everybody in the world can read and write English, or to a very high level, yet it's the global language. So the same would apply to Chinese. Of course, some people would need high levels of reading and writing, but not everyone. I think also today there are technological devices that can make the using characters much more easier. So on computers or your mobile phone, you can type in Pinyin, which is the Romanization system for Chinese. So you can write the Chinese words in the Roman alphabet, and the software will automatically convert it into Chinese characters. So this saves a lot of time and effort, because you don't have to learn how to physically write the characters. You can just learn the pinyin and how to recognize the characters. So that makes it much easier. And we can also look historically. There was a situation where Chinese characters were adopted in Japan, Korea, and Vietnam as the language of scholarly communication, because at that time, China was the most powerful and important country in the world. And so because of that, people in those countries learned to use characters despite the difficulties. So it may be a situation where if China was the superpower, people would just learn Chinese characters because, you know, it would be necessary. And again, I'm sure all of you know there are challenges involved in learning English too. So yet it still became the global language. So while I acknowledge the difficulties of Chinese, it's not an easy language in all aspects, but I don't think that by itself would stop it becoming a global language.
Okay, we still have time, right, Mr. Ariadna? Because we see that there are some more questions. Yeah. So 3 more questions. Yeah.
It's until 10 actually.
Okay.
Right,
So
Jeff?
the next question is from Nawasha Kolila. I think she's our student from our department. Yeah, the question is, why can China become a country that has a high economic level and can dominate the world economy, while China has not yet become a major world power and China has not yet become a developed country? Yeah, that's the question.
Well, I think if you look at the history of China, China in the late 1970s was just emerging from a very politically and economically chaotic time. So there was a lot of work to do to rebuild the economy and to rebuild its relations with the outside world. So I think China has, in that span of time, has achieved quite a lot. Its level of economic development, standards of living today are certainly much better than they were 40 or so years ago. But I think partly it's also to do with the economic development model of China. Its development was based on that sort of having cheap labor and manufacturing cheap products to sell to the rest of the world. And that is what made it or enabled it to have a rapid period of economic development. But now it's at a situation where it needs to move away from that model and go into a more sort of sophisticated kind of economy. So that's the challenge for China, whether it can make that move from the development based on the cheap labor and cheap exports to a more sort of sophisticated economic model.
Okay. Yeah, well, next, Jeff, we have Michael Samosir from UNIMED, and I think he wants to ask your opinion about his statement. Yeah, here it is. From education point of view, Indonesian private schools already have Chinese language learning subject. The main reason he believes is economic and China's diaspora. Yeah, he believes economy, entertainment, and politics are the main factors in global language domination. China has become the second largest economic country, followed by India. So, how do you think about India, Jeff? That's the question from Michael Samosir.
So you mean opinion about India becoming a world superpower?
Yeah, that's the question, I think.
Okay. Yeah, well, it's possible. I'm not very familiar with India, unfortunately, but I mean, it is predicted that its population will become larger than China one day. And there's a reasonably high level of English language proficiency in India, which may be helpful for its economic development. And I think as there are tensions between China and some Western countries, then there may be more emphasis placed on relations with India as well. So, but I think China is still probably the most likely country to become the first biggest economy, and so it may be that China is the first biggest, and then India is the second biggest, or possibly third biggest.
Okay, yeah. We have two more questions from the participants. The first is Ritana Pitupolo. Ask you this one. If Chinese language becomes the dominant power language in the worldwide, so what is your opinion about USA, West countries, and Australia? How are they facing this phenomenon? That's the question from Rita.
Yes, well, I think there's a lot of concern in Western countries about China's rise presently and the impact that it may have on the world. So I think that that those countries that mentioned would be quite worried and would be wanting to take steps to try to counteract any perceived threat. So as we discussed before, the case of Australia buying submarines and entering into agreements with the US and the UK for security and defence is one trend that we're observing.
Okay, I think Zauza is the last question from Zauza, I think. Yeah, this is the question. The replacement, wait a second. The replacement of English as a global language will most likely happen if China were to become a superpower to USA right now, which is predicted to happen sometimes in 100 years to come. But is there perhaps a possibility for some these drastic factors that could that maybe slow down or accelerate the years? Yeah, that's the question from Zauza.
Yes, I think it's possible. I think an obvious one and an unfortunate one would be if there was a war between China and America and its allies. I think if China won such a war, then it would be in a position to create a new international system under its leadership, with then Chinese would likely be the language associated with any international organizations or economic arrangements in the world like that. And it may also be the case that, as with the Soviet Union, that China may be able to compel other countries to install Chinese in their education systems or to be used in life in general. So that could happen. As for slowing it down, there could be an environmental disaster, for example, or an economic slowdown in China that may reduce interest in Chinese language learning and China's chances of becoming a superpower. So I hope that answers the question.
Okay. It seems that there are still many questions related to your topic, Jeff. But because we have a limited time, is that right, Pak Ariadna? So I think the participants can ask you, and send the questions by email. And Mr. Jeffrey has already told us, give us the information about the email if you want to contact him. That's the solution, I think. Well, Pak Ariadna, is that the time for us to conclude what has already stated?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really sorry, dear participants. We have really limited times to discuss with Jeffrey here. And well, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to make a conclusion based on what Mr. Jeffrey has already presented. Yeah, well, English is the language most closely associated with the processes of globalization and is seen as a means of making connection, accessing knowledge, gaining employment, furthering education, and acquiring social status in a mobile world. where people, products, and ideas flow readily. It occupies a unique position as a global language, and the teaching and learning of English is immensely popular worldwide. Yeah, and however, recent geopolitical events have reignited debate, yeah, about the future position of English. Okay, and Jeffrey's presentation focuses on the implication of China's rise for English as a global language and the associated prevalence of TESOL. Well, last but not least, our big thanks, of course, to our great guest speaker for contributing your fruitful materials in this Friday Forum webinar. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, please give a big applause to Dr. Jeffrey Gill.
Thank you very
Okay,
much.
thank
It's my
you.
pleasure
Okay, let me
presenting
give
and
the
talking to
mic
you.
back to the chairperson of the Friday Forum, Bapak Dr. M. Nasir M. Hum. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Jeffrey Gill. After listening to your explanation about how the implication of China to you're still here, okay? How the implication of China language to English language. Now I make a short conclusion that beware of our department, like that. One day, sooner or later, it will be closed if China master everything. That is the seems like that the conclusion. All of that. Make it short. Beware of your department and beware of your student. One day, China will be the next lingua franca. I'm sorry, no, that's joke. Okay. Anyway, thank you, Dr. Jeffrey Gill from Flinders. This is I will be give a great thank you, big thank you for your explanation about how to threat Chinese language to every student of English in all over the world. So we have as a teacher, say that as we are as a teacher of English, should be considered to learn Chinese. Seems like that, or I don't know. It's a quotation, I think, to have to learn Chinese soon. Okay. Anyway, anyhow, thanks to all the participants to be here. All the professor also join us in here, and all the dean, first dean, second dean, all of them. Thank you, head department. I think we will see you again on the next webinar from Friday Forum. Thank you, Jeffrey Gill from.
Yes, thank you,
Flinders.
Jeff.
Pak Nasir, don't we have photo session?
Yes.
Pak Nasir, photo
Yeah.
session, please.
Oh yes,
Photo
photo
session.
session. Just a moment.
Yeah, just a moment.
Jeffrey Gill, please, Pak Ari, photo
Yeah.
session.
Huh?
Photo session.
For the session, nanti moderator.
Yes. I think.
You do the photo session.
Okay, let me do it.
Ah,
Okay,
Please,
yeah, the
moderator.
first slide. Okay, next, give your best smile. Yeah, we have 8 slides here. Okay, and then the third. Okay, next. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, and the last one.
A lot of.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. We have
Thank
already.
you.
Okay, thank you. See you
Thank
all
you.
for the
Bye.
next webinar from Friday
Thank you,
Forum.
Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff, for
Thank you,
coming
Jeff.
to Medan.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure. Thank you for your very interesting questions and discussion.
Do visit us in Medan, ya.
Yes, I would love to. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think everybody, we can leave the room now. Yeah.
Okay, no worries.
Yeah.
It's nice to see you again.
Yeah, nice to meet you, Jeff. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. My pleasure. See you. Bye.
See you.
Bye.
See you, Jeff.
See you.
See you, Jeff.
Bye.